So in this lesson, we're going to talk about conflict and negotiation. Now, conflict begins when any party perceives that they have been negatively affected or they're about to be negatively affected by something that they're either working on or they're going to have to do, or it's going to be taken away or whatever. And then it becomes a bit of a tug of war. The traditional view of conflict was that all conflict was dysfunctional. That's not always the case. But that's how we normally thought about conflict. A failure of managers to be responsive to the needs of their employees, poor communication, lack of openness, lack of trust, all those things cause conflict. But there's more than that. Now, there's also an interactionist view of conflict. And in the interactionist view of conflict, harmonious, peaceful, tranquil, cooperative group might actually be worse because you're not going to have the kind of conflict that you need to get to good results. Now, I used to work with somebody who was like that, and so he would always intentionally stir up conflict, whether you needed it or not. And it kind of looked like this guy throwing the bomb here, that it would always backfire because he was just trying to stir up conflict for the sake of stirring up conflict, and that's not necessarily a good way to do it. Now, not all conflicts are good. There's functional conflict and there's dysfunctional conflict. Now, functional conflict is helping us being in conflict in order to get to the ends that we're trying to get to. Dysfunctional conflict usually hurts the group performance or keeps us from getting where we're trying to get to. Again, there's three types of conflict. There's task, relationship, and process. Relationship conflict is almost always dysfunctional. Okay, when you don't like the other person and therefore you oppose whatever they say, that's a dysfunctional place to be. Having conflict over the task or having conflict over the process of how we're going to do it, not necessarily bad. You can usually improve the process when you have conflict over those issues. And then you have three loci of conflict. It's between two people, or it's within the team, or it's outside the team. And then we have dimensions of handling a conflict. Okay, so if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see assertiveness, and you look on the bottom, you see cooperative. So to the degree that you're, completely assertive but not cooperative, you're competing. To the degree that you're neither assertive nor cooperative, you're just avoiding the process. To the degree that you're cooperative but not assertive, you're accommodating. Yeah, sure, whatever you want to do, that's what we'll do. So there's kind of a sweet spot in the middle with compromising, but it's even better, instead of being just compromising and just rolling over, it's even better to be collaborating. And that's where we want to be is most of the time. Not always. Sometimes there's a place to compete and accommodate and compromise. Generally not a place to avoid. But sometimes those other things are okay. But collaborating is really where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Now, there are different levels of conflict, so you can start with minor disagreements, but then it'll escalate over time. If the employee exercises voice, by exercising voice, I mean speaking up, talking about what the problem is and trying to get it redressed, and it does not get heard, well, then it gets louder. There becomes overt questioning, and if he's still not heard, it becomes even louder, and there's assertive verbal attacks, and if he doesn't get heard, there's even more. And just as my voice escalated, that's kind of how he feels at that time, which leads to threats and ultimatums. At this point, one of two things either is going to happen. He's either going to become damaging or disruptive, or he's going to exit. He's going to depart from the organization. It's just, enough's enough. Not because you have got him out, but because he can't stand working with you anymore. He will leave. He'll choose exit rather than because he's not been heard. And so nobody likes that. Following the continuum now, if you go even further, you're going to overt efforts to destroy the other party. And I'm sure that there are instances where people are just holding this kind of grudge and going on and really trying to just destroy other people. But that's how this conflict works. And if you can diffuse it way down at the very beginning in minor disagreements and overt questioning and challenging, that's usually a much better path than letting it build and build. But again, it builds and builds because the person usually doesn't feel heard. Managing functional conflict. Conflicts arise when people use different language to discuss the same thing, or they see things very differently and you're not listening to or hearing how they understand the organization or the situation to be. So the best tranquilizer to conflict is usually open and frank discussion. Now it's scary because you're going to, in the open, frank discussion, and I don't mean a veneer of discussion either. I don't mean let's all talk about this even though we know we're not going to talk about the hot buttons. I don't mean that. I mean open and frank discussion where you actually get to hear each other and try to wrestle with real issues. If you do that, that's the It's scary to do because you lose a little bit of control. But if you do that, it usually diffuses the conflict. Now, negotiation is this process where two or more parties are, I want this and you want that, and we want to trade, okay? And so usually you talk about, people across the table from each other when they're negotiating. Right, they're on different sides of it. Now, there's distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining. Now, distributive bargaining is, let's say I want to sell my used car, right? And on the other side of that transaction is somebody who wants to pay as little as possible for that used car. Okay, that's distributive because it's either this or that, and to the degree that he pays more money, I get less, or vice versa. I mean, it's one way or the other. It's really cutting up the pie. Now, there's also integrative bargaining, and integrative bargaining is like this. Let's say that my wife and I go to dinner. And we order this as a little side with these vegetables, and it's got broccoli, and it's got lima beans and some other things in it. Well, distributive bargaining would, how much can I get from that appetizer onto my plate? But integrative bargaining is different. I like broccoli, and she likes lima beans for whatever reason. She just enjoys that disgusting vegetable. So integrative bargaining means I get all the broccoli, she gets all the lima beans, and we're both happy. Now, you can't do that with everything, but to the degree that you can do it, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try to help both parties get what they want if it can be done? So that's integrative bargaining. There's an old story, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or whether it's grounded in reality, about Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. Sometime during the Revolutionary War, they had to room together as they were delegates to either the convention or as they were ambassadors or whatever it was. And they weren't really getting along. Franklin wanted the window open because he wanted fresh air in the room, and Adams didn't want it open because it would blow his papers all around. Well, it sounds like it's an either this or that. And so they realized if they open up the top window instead of the bottom window, they could have the fresh air and the papers wouldn't blow around. That's integrative bargaining. Okay, so the research talks about this. The research says that when you're engaged in distributive bargaining, you can do some things that'll make your position better. Make the first offer. When you do that, you anchor that this is what the offer should be, or what it's, this is reality. And then they have to move off there. Psychologically, it's a more powerful place. It shows power, that kind of thing. However, you want to be very careful when you're dealing with this kind of thing, because when you are engaged in that kind of behavior, what you're doing is focusing on a short-term relationship. More often than not, if you can, you want to engage in integrative bargaining where you are focused on a long-term relationship between you and the other party. Again, if it's a one-off, that might be the way to go. Right now, though, if you're thinking in terms of, I'm going to be dealing with this person in the future, think about their interests, not just their positions. And the interests are very hidden. Okay, so, and we don't generally deal with the interests because you have to have trust on both sides, where both sides are open with their information, sensitive to each other's needs, able to see each other's positions and interests in order to accommodate each other's interests. Because if it's hidden, we don't know how to accommodate it. Okay, so what are the implications for managers? So conflict is one of those places where it's very easy to see what you really believe. Okay, does your orthodoxy, that's what you believe, really match your orthopraxy? That's how you treat others. And this is a place where it really emerges, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Do you seek to get all that you can get out of everybody, out of every transaction? Because if you do, if you're trying to use them up and spit them out, that's very different than if you're trying to help them meet their objectives. And if you're looking at a long-term relationship, try to help others meet their objectives. And then you're going to have the best position later on. When you're helping them, they want to help you in integrative bargaining. Okay, that's all that I have for now. There's more to this chapter than just what I went over, but these are the things that I wanted you to emphasize and focus on. All right, we'll talk to you next week.